You don't lack discipline. You're just letting emotions run the show, quietly, subtly, but completely. One moment of irritation. A wave of self-doubt. That creeping urge to avoid what matters most. And just like that, your day, your direction, gets hijacked. But here's the truth. Stoicism isn't about becoming numb. It doesn't ask you to suppress your humanity. It teaches you to lead it. To be the one at the helm, calm, aware, unshaken, while the storm inside rages on. Because emotions will rise. The chaos will come. But you get to decide whether you drift or steer. This isn't about becoming colder. It's about becoming stronger, where it matters most, within. Subscribe if you're ready to build discipline, not from force, but from inner stillness. 1. Discipline doesn't collapse because you're lazy, it collapses because you're letting the waves drive the ship. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one tells you. You're not lacking discipline. You're just being ruled by waves you never learned to ride. Life throws emotions at you like an ocean in a storm: anger, doubt, boredom, insecurity, shame. Most men? They don't steer through it. They get tossed around, hoping motivation will carry them. But motivation is just another wave, and waves come and go. If your discipline is tied to how you feel, it will always collapse. You don't need more hacks. You don't need a better to-do list. What you need is the skill no school taught you, how to steer the ship while the storm is raging inside. That's what Stoicism was always about. You can't control the waves. You can't stop emotions from rising. But you can control whether you grab the wheel or sit there and let life toss you around like driftwood. Think about it. How many mornings have you skipped your goals just because you didn't feel like it? How often has one bad mood wrecked your whole day, your health, your work, your mindset? How many important things have you postponed, waiting for the right mood to arrive? Discipline isn't about pushing through. That's brute force. And brute force burns out. Real discipline is navigational. You sense the wave, you acknowledge it, but you steer anyway. Emotion is the ocean. Discipline is the ship. Awareness is the captain. This is the mindset of men who last. The gym doesn't build this. Waking up at 5 a.m. doesn't build this. This is inner work. It starts when you realize, I'm not my feelings. I'm the one who decides what to do with them. And the best part? Once you build this awareness, you become dangerous in the best way. Because now, you don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel motivated. You just need to be present enough to notice the wave and steer anyway. So ask yourself, who's been steering your life lately, you or your emotional weather? If you're done letting temporary feelings sabotage permanent goals. If you're tired of trying to be disciplined and ready to become the kind of man who leads himself even in chaos. Subscribe. Not for surface-level advice, but to train that deeper part of you, the part that leads, not reacts. Because discipline isn't built in silence. It's built in storms. And once you master the waves, the ocean is yours. 2. Discipline begins the moment you catch yourself drifting. You've learned this much. Discipline isn't about brute force, it's about learning to steer the ship in chaos. But here's the next truth most men miss. You can't steer if you don't even realize you're drifting. Most people don't crash because of one big storm. They crash because they never noticed the slow drift. That's what Marcus Aurelius understood. He didn't journal to track his habits or manifest success. He wrote to wage war on himself, internally. To confront the subtle lies the mind tells when no one's watching. The drift doesn't always look like failure. Sometimes, it looks like productivity that isn't aligned. Sometimes, it's saying yes to too much. Sometimes, it's scrolling for 5 minutes that become 50. Sometimes, it's doing everything except what truly matters. And here's the trap. If you don't pause to see the drift, you'll never course correct. You'll wake up weeks, months, even years off track, and wonder how it happened. That's why awareness is the first skill of discipline. Before any schedule, before any system, before any ambition. Because if you can't see your own chaos, how can you possibly rise above it? You want clarity? You want direction? Start by turning inward, not outward. Your calendar won't save you if your inner compass is broken. Every great man who led himself first had to confront what was leading him astray. That's what Marcus did each night, with brutal honesty. No fluff. No excuses. Just self-inquiry. What did I avoid today? Where did I react instead of choose? What fear guided me without permission? That's how you start reclaiming the wheel. Not by piling more on top, but by stripping away what's secretly steering you. Because real discipline is quiet. It starts when you're alone with yourself, no audience, no accolades, no applause. Just truth. This is the work most avoid, but it's the work that changes everything. So if you've ever felt like your life is off track, but you couldn't quite name why. If your days are full but your direction feels blurry. If your intentions are sharp but your follow-through wobbles under pressure. Then it's time to stop blaming the storm. And start asking, who or what is steering me right now? That's what we dive into here. Not shallow motivation. Not another morning routine. But the deeper, uncomfortable, liberating questions that real men ask when they're ready to evolve. If you're ready to stop drifting. If you're ready to lead yourself with clarity, not chaos. Subscribe and begin the quiet work of coming home to your own direction. Because the most powerful course correction you'll ever make is simply learning to notice when you're no longer steering. 3. You don't control behavior until you master your reaction. If noticing the drift is the first step to reclaiming discipline, the next is far more uncomfortable, but far more powerful. You must take full ownership of how you react. Not just when it's convenient. Not just when you've had a good night's sleep. But especially in those micro moments when everything in you wants to snap, escape, scroll, or shut down. This is where most men break. Because it's easy to build discipline on a good day. But real mastery is built in the 1-second pause right before you react, when your system is triggered, your mind races, and your emotions scream louder than reason. Epictetus said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them." That means the problem isn't the traffic, the criticism, the unexpected bill, or the pressure. The problem is how you respond to it. And here's the part no one wants to hear. Until you learn how to hold the pause, you will keep losing control over and over again. It doesn't matter how much you plan, how strict your schedule is, or how strong your goals are. If your reactions own you, then nothing you build will last. Because discipline isn't about powering through. It's about mastering that tiny sliver of time between stimulus and action. That breath where your future is either protected or sacrificed. Think about it. You don't break your diet because you lack a plan. You break it because your emotions hijack you in a moment of craving. You don't skip your priorities because you're lazy. You skip them because a feeling of discomfort rises, and you don't know how to sit with it. You don't lash out because you're evil. You lash out because a trigger hits, and you never learned how to pause and redirect. That's what this is all about. Learning to become a man who doesn't get swept up in the tide of emotion, but instead stands still, feels the wave, and chooses his next move with precision. It's not suppression. It's not pretending you don't feel anything. It's acknowledging the emotion, but choosing to lead yourself anyway. That's the ultimate form of strength. Because if you can hold yourself in the heat of the moment, if you can delay the reaction by even a second, then you've already won. You've stepped into awareness. You've taken the first swing at real inner leadership. This is why Stoicism isn't about emotionlessness. It's about emotional discipline. The modern world teaches men to either explode or numb out. Stoicism teaches you to observe, breathe, and act on principle, not impulse. So if your reactions have been driving the ship, if you find yourself regretting what you say, what you skip, or what you sabotage, Then it's time to reclaim your power. Not in loud, dramatic gestures, but in quiet, sovereign choices. And that work starts now. Subscribe if you're ready to stop letting knee-jerk reactions run your life. Subscribe if you're done blaming the outside and ready to master the moment inside. Because your future isn't built in plans. It's built in pauses. 4. Procrastination isn't laziness, it's emotional avoidance. If mastering your reaction is the foundation of discipline, then understanding why you avoid is the next frontier. Because once you begin noticing your emotional impulses, those urges to lash out, shut down, escape, another truth starts to surface. You realize it's not just moments of anger or pressure that knock you off course. It's also the subtle resistance that creeps in right before you do the thing that matters most. This is where procrastination lives. And most men misunderstand it completely. You've been told that procrastination is a time management issue. That you're lazy, undisciplined, unmotivated. But it's not about time. It's about emotion. Procrastination is emotional avoidance in disguise. When a task feels overwhelming, boring, or uncertain, your nervous system registers it as a threat, not to your body, but to your comfort. And because you never learned how to sit with discomfort without needing to escape it, you scroll. You snack. You clean the kitchen. You rearrange the priorities list for the 15th time. Not because you're lazy, but because you're trying to outrun a feeling. That's why willpower alone will never solve this. Because procrastination isn't about your calendar. It's about your relationship with discomfort. And that's where most systems fail you. They try to fix the symptom, missed deadlines, wasted hours, instead of going to the root, the inability to be still with emotional friction. Here's the truth you need to sit with. You procrastinate when the work threatens your identity, exposes your fear, or reminds you of your limitations. You delay not because you don't care, but because you care so much, and the weight of doing it right feels unbearable. That's not laziness. That's fear. And this is where the Stoic mindset becomes your most powerful ally. Because the Stoic doesn't avoid. He observes. He steps back. He names the emotion, watches it rise, and then chooses action not because it feels good, but because it aligns with his values. That's emotional courage. And it's the only path out of the loop you've been stuck in. So if you've been beating yourself up for not starting, if you find yourself stuck in cycles of self-sabotage and false starts, if your dreams remain untouched not because you don't want them, but because something in you always finds a way to delay, it's time to stop shaming yourself and start seeing what's really going on. You're not broken. You're just trying to protect yourself from feelings you never learned how to face. And that's exactly what we teach here, not how to grind harder, but how to face discomfort without flinching. Subscribe if you're ready to stop avoiding the life you were built to lead. Subscribe if you're done reacting, done drifting, done postponing. Subscribe if you're ready to act, not from hype, but from clarity. Because the truth is this. You won't escape procrastination by trying harder. You'll escape it by becoming stronger at feeling what you've always avoided. And once you stop running from emotion, you stop running from everything. 5. You can't maintain habits without emotional control. If procrastination is the emotional resistance that keeps you from starting, then emotional instability is what keeps you from staying consistent. It's one thing to begin. To feel that spark, that motivation, that surge of clarity. To say, this time, I'll stick with it. But motivation fades. The novelty wears off. Life happens. And what happens next is what separates the boys chasing habits from the men who embody discipline. You've seen it before, the gym streak that dies after 2 weeks. The journaling routine that evaporates after one rough day. The morning ritual that crumbles the first time you wake up tired, stressed, or behind. Why does that happen? It's not because the habit wasn't useful. It's not because the system was broken. It's because your emotions hijacked the mission. You built the habit on a foundation of feeling good. But real discipline begins when you keep going without that feeling. That's the truth no one told you. You can't maintain any long-term habit if your emotions still have a say in whether or not you show up. And here's the uncomfortable part. You don't rise when it feels right, you rise when it feels irrelevant. Because discipline is about loyalty to action, not loyalty to mood. But this isn't about becoming robotic. This is about becoming stable. A man who still feels everything, but doesn't obey every impulse. Who can feel resistance and still choose consistency. Who understands that I don't feel like it is not a reason, it's a test. Stoicism teaches you to decouple behavior from emotion. To let your values lead, not your ever-changing moods. Because if you let mood run the show, you'll always reset. Always start over. Always wait for the next wave of motivation to carry you. But if you learn to anchor your habits in something deeper, in principle, identity, purpose, then they become unshakable. They don't depend on how you feel in the morning. They depend on who you've chosen to become. So if you found yourself stuck in cycles of inconsistency, if you keep falling off and blaming lack of willpower or poor habits, then look deeper. The problem isn't the routine. The problem is that emotion still owns your behavior. And that changes the day you stop asking, do I feel like it? And start asking, is this aligned with who I'm committed to being? That's what we're building here. A deeper kind of discipline. A stillness beneath the surface. A structure that holds, even when life doesn't. Subscribe if you're done tying your goals to fleeting moods. Subscribe if you're ready to act from principle, not permission. Because the strongest habits don't come from hype. They come from the man who acts the same, no matter the weather inside him. 6. You don't choose your emotions, but you always choose your response. Once you accept that discipline requires emotional stability, a new layer of responsibility begins to unfold. You start realizing that the real work isn't just about showing up. It's about how you show up, regardless of how you feel. And here's the hard truth. You don't get to choose what emotions arise. You don't control the initial wave. You never did. Fear, anger, shame, fatigue, they arrive uninvited. Sometimes with reason. Sometimes without. They surge through you like a storm, often without warning. But that's not the issue. The issue is what happens after the emotion shows up. Because while you don't get to choose the wave, you always get to choose how you respond to it. That space, that moment between feeling and acting, is where discipline is built or broken. And that space is always available. You just haven't been trained to find it. Most men haven't. The modern world teaches you to obey the emotion. You're angry? React. You're tired? Escape. You're stressed? Numb out. But Stoicism teaches you something radically different. It says, feel it fully. Respond deliberately. Not because you're trying to suppress the emotion, but because you're committed to not letting it dictate who you become. Because you are not your reaction. You are the one choosing your reaction. That's where your power lies. And that power is what separates men who build consistent, grounded lives from men who swing between extremes. This doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become anchored. A man who feels deeply, but chooses wisely. A man who allows emotions to pass through, but refuses to hand them the keys to the ship. And let's be honest, most of your regrets, most of your missed opportunities, most of the relationships you fumbled or the goals you abandoned, they weren't because of the situation. They were because of how you reacted in the heat of the moment. This is the work now. Not fixing every emotion. Not trying to be perfect. But learning to create space. To breathe. To choose. To lead yourself before you do anything else. So if you're tired of being owned by your reactions, if you're done justifying behavior that doesn't align with who you're trying to become, if you're ready to stop being a prisoner of your impulses, then this is where it begins. Subscribe if you're ready to reclaim the space between emotion and action. Subscribe if you're ready to train the muscle that matters more than willpower, awareness. Because the quality of your life is determined by a single pattern: what you do after you feel. And once you master that space, you master yourself. 7. Emotion may rise, but reason must lead. If your power lies in how you respond to emotion, then the next step is learning who leads in the moment of impact. Because no matter how much awareness you build, no matter how many times you pause before reacting, there will be moments when emotion still surges strong. Moments where anger flashes, where fear grips, where frustration coils tight in your chest. And in those moments, the question is not, can I avoid emotion? The real question is, who's going to lead right now, the emotion or the reason? This is the turning point in every man's discipline journey. Not when he stops feeling, but when he decides who is allowed to speak first. And here's the timeless Stoic truth. Emotion may rise, but reason must lead. That's not just poetic. It's practical. Because emotion is reactive. It wants to protect you, defend you, satisfy you in the now. It doesn't think long-term. It doesn't care about your goals. It only wants relief. But reason? Reason sees beyond the moment. It remembers what you're building. It's the voice that asks, what matters most, right now, and 10 years from now? And every time you allow reason to lead, you reinforce your integrity. You strengthen the path of discipline. It's not easy. It never will be. But this is what separates the men who know what they should do from the men who live it. Think about your own life. How many fights could have been avoided if reason had spoken before your anger? How many opportunities lost because fear shouted louder than clarity? How many mornings did you stay in bed because comfort took the mic and reason wasn't even in the room? This isn't about perfection. It's about hierarchy. Emotion gets a seat at the table, but reason sits at the head of it. And once you make that internal shift, everything begins to align. You don't stop feeling, but you stop following every feeling. You don't stop hurting, but you stop reacting from hurt. You begin to trust yourself, not because you feel good, but because you know you'll act in alignment regardless of how you feel. This is where emotional strength is forged. Not in silence, not in repression, but in choosing which voice gets to steer the ship. So if you're tired of being yanked around by impulse, if you're ready to stop losing to your temper, your urges, your comfort zone, subscribe. Not to be emotionless, but to learn how to let reason take the wheel, even when the waves rise. Because emotion may roar, but your destiny is written by the one who chooses what happens next. 8. Self-discipline is a result, not a starting point. Once you understand that emotion may rise, but reason must lead, another realization quietly begins to take shape. Discipline isn't where you start. It's where you arrive. You don't wake up one day with iron willpower. You don't flip a switch and suddenly become the man who follows through on everything. You become that man, slowly, intentionally, repeatedly, through a process that almost no one wants to talk about. Because most people approach discipline backwards. They start with the grind. They start with the checklist. They start with a perfect morning routine or a 90-day plan. But here's the truth that Stoic wisdom and lived experience makes undeniable. You cannot build lasting discipline if your inner world is still chaotic. You can force yourself for a few days, maybe even a few weeks. But if you haven't addressed the deeper patterns, the triggers, the beliefs, the emotional responses, then eventually you will burn out, sabotage, or snap back to old defaults. Because discipline is not the first step. It's the result of everything that came before it. It's the natural outcome of awareness, emotional regulation, clarity, and intentional action repeated under pressure. It's the fruit of doing the work, not just on the outside, but on the inside. And most importantly, it's earned. It's trained into you through small decisions when no one is watching. When you say no to distraction. When you pause instead of explode. When you keep your word, even when no one else would notice if you didn't. Discipline is not about being rigid. It's about being centered. A man who bends under pressure, but never breaks alignment. A man who adapts without abandoning what matters. A man who doesn't need perfect conditions to move, because he's no longer waiting for the right mood to begin. And that kind of man? He didn't start disciplined. He became disciplined through a series of courageous choices, often invisible to the world. So if you've been beating yourself up because you keep starting and stopping, if you've told yourself, I just need to be more disciplined, but nothing seems to stick, then it's time to flip the script. Don't chase discipline like a destination. Build the infrastructure that makes discipline possible. That's what we're doing here. We're not stacking habits on shaky ground. We're rebuilding the ground itself. We're learning to master emotion, sharpen awareness, reclaim our response. So that when discipline appears, it has something solid to stand on. Subscribe if you're tired of white-knuckling your goals. Subscribe if you're done pretending that more hustle will solve a lack of alignment. Because discipline isn't the beginning of the journey. It's the evidence that you've become someone new. 9. Success doesn't come from willpower, but from inner calm. If self-discipline is not where the journey begins, but where it arrives, then we must ask, what makes that arrival possible? What carries a man through the difficult days, the doubts, the discomfort? Most will tell you it's willpower. But willpower is fragile. It's like fuel in a small tank, useful in bursts, but unsustainable on long roads. You've tried it before. You've pushed hard. You've braced. You muscled your way through. And it worked until it didn't. Because willpower runs out. Especially when the storm hits. Especially when your emotional system is overclocked, your nervous system is fried, and the voice in your head won't shut up. That's when most men fall off track, not because they didn't care enough, but because they never learned how to calm the chaos within. This is what few ever realize. Success isn't built on force. It's built on stillness. Not passive stillness. Not laziness disguised as rest. But anchored calm, the kind that holds its ground when the world shakes. Stoic calm. Trained, not inherited. Built moment by moment through practiced awareness, emotional clarity, and a refusal to let noise define action. Because here's what happens when you operate from calm. You see clearly. You decide with precision. You execute without being hijacked by the moment's emotion. You're no longer swinging between extremes, manic ambition one day, exhausted collapse the next. You become consistent, rooted, unshakable. And from that inner calm, real power emerges. The kind of power that doesn't scream. It moves with quiet, relentless strength. That's what you're really seeking, not more motivation, but less inner chaos. Not more force, but deeper presence. And that presence, when cultivated, changes everything. You stop quitting too soon, not because you pushed harder, but because you were steady enough to stay. You stop reacting from impulse, because your clarity outpaced your emotion. You stop burning out, because your nervous system is no longer running on panic and pressure. You begin to lead yourself not through hype, but through harmony. So if you've been relying on willpower and keep hitting the wall, if your best efforts feel like sprints that end in collapse, if you know you're capable of more, but can't seem to find the rhythm that lasts, then the answer isn't to push harder. It's to slow down, go deeper, and build quieter strength. That's what we're cultivating here. Subscribe if you're ready to trade adrenaline for awareness. Subscribe if you're done chasing intensity and ready to build inner infrastructure that holds under pressure. Because success doesn't belong to the man who shouts the loudest. It belongs to the man who moves with calm and doesn't stop moving. 10. Don't start with the schedule, start with the mind. If success is born from inner calm, not brute force, then it's time to question one of the most common mistakes people make in the pursuit of discipline. They start from the outside in. They think the problem is the schedule. the planner, the app, the calendar. So they download new tools. They craft new systems. They make ambitious lists. And for a while, it works. Until it doesn't. Because no matter how beautiful the structure is, if it's built on a restless, chaotic, reactive mind, it won't stand. It can't. The truth is, your schedule is only as strong as the state of mind that drives it. You don't follow through because of bullet points. You follow through because your mind is clear, stable, and committed, regardless of how the day feels. This is where most men go wrong. They think, if I just get the right system in place, I'll be consistent. But the real question is deeper. What version of you is trying to run that system? Because if the man behind the plan is still driven by stress, doubt, emotion, and impulse, no system will save him. He'll rewrite his priorities every time he gets overwhelmed. He'll bail on the mission the moment discomfort arises. He'll obey his moods, not his values, and call it burnout. That's why Stoicism starts where most systems end. Not with task management, but with mind management. It teaches you to sit with discomfort, to name the wave before it takes the wheel, to hold the pause before reaction, to move from values, not urges. And when that becomes your baseline, then structure becomes powerful. Not as a cage, but as an expression of clarity. Because once your mind is steady, your schedule becomes something else entirely. It's no longer a set of boxes to check. It's a reflection of who you are becoming. So if your plans keep collapsing, if your best ideas stay stuck in the almost phase, if you keep trying to fix the structure, but the follow-through never lasts, then it's time to stop tinkering with the surface and go deeper. Rebuild the mind, the root, and the rest will follow. Subscribe if you're ready to stop outsourcing your discipline to external tools. Subscribe if you're ready to build a kind of inner clarity that no missed alarm, no stressful day, no changing mood can shake. Because the schedule is only a mirror. And if you want what it reflects to change, you don't start with the hours. You start with the mind that fills them.